Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the TFC audio project. In this episode, Mike and I have a conversation with an interesting friend of ours from Ottawa, Daniel Donnelly. Danny's a super interesting human, and we really enjoyed having a chat with him. He tells us about his personal discovery of going barefoot and his experience of spending the better part of 2 years barefoot in Ottawa. We talk about some of the solo hikes that he's gone on, which are fairly intense, and how he kind of finds it a way to reconnect with nature on those hikes and disconnect from technology. And we delve a bit into philosophy, which is a topic Danny's very well versed and just overall a treat to kind of listen to. This episode of the audio project is sponsored by TFC Seminars. The seminar is our 6-hour education experience designed to help people understand why their feet are important, why so many people in 2018 are having problems with their feet, how to restore optimal foot function, how to restore ankle and hip mobility, which is something a lot of people struggle with restrictions on, preventing running injuries, how to use walking as an ankle and hip mobility exercise, what to look for in footwear, and we cover lots more. We do our best to include lots of playful movement drills and to be moving for the majority of the seminar so you can not only learn but feel what we're trying to teach. Check out thefootcollective.com or tfc-shop.com to get more info on our 2019 seminar dates or to register for a session. They're open to anyone, including health professionals, personal trainers, physicians, or just people having issues with their body that aren't being given the right information on restoring optimal function, eliminating pain, and preventing future injury. This episode is also sponsored by our travel partner, Nanook Protective Hard Cases. We use their gear to transport our equipment to and from seminars and workshops. They make super high quality cases. They make them all in Canada. And they can keep your electronics safe during travel so you can not worry about your stuff getting damaged during travel. Check out their cases at nanook.com, nanuk.com, for more details on that. That's it for sponsors, so let's dig into this chat with Danny. Hope you enjoy.
It's the TFC audio project.
It's a collective effort. Help people understand their bodies, starting at the feet are the gateway for people to see that there's an issue. You know, a foot conversation is always a whole body conversation. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Hey folks, Nick and Mike here with a special guest today on the audio project, Danny Donnelly. What's up, Danny?
Not much. How about yourself?
Not too much, man. Thanks for coming out. We appreciate you taking the time on a Sunday. I know everyone's got stuff to do, so
Thanks for having me.
Danny's a very interesting human being. He's got a lot of different experiences that are not necessarily the way we think about surviving as a human today. They're not abnormal, but for the average person, they're extremely abnormal. And so, very, deeply rooted in philosophy. I think he's probably one of the happier humans, and he does things a little bit differently. So I guess introduce yourself, Danny, first, last name, and just a couple sentences about yourself.
So yeah, I'm Daniel Donnelly. I was born and raised in Ottawa. I have a formal background in philosophy.
Cool.
I took a degree in Carleton. And then beyond that, I just have a career in project management / project coordination.
Cool, man.
And other than that, I'm just trying to, enjoy experiences and broaden the mind, pretty much.
Cool. Well, when you tell me about your experiences, it makes me realize that maybe I'm not doing enough to experience the full threshold of what humans can experience, because there's you definitely have some interesting stuff that we'll kind of dive into today. And maybe even like the first place will be, Mike told me this, that you spent several years barefoot. So let's talk about that, how it came about, what is actually meant, because I don't even know the in-depth story. So maybe give us because obviously, TFC Audio Project, we talk about feet. I think it'll probably be a smaller part of this podcast, but let's start there, because that sounds like a really interesting experience, and I just want to know, where did it come from? What made you want to do that, and what was the experience like? What did you learn from it?
So it initially started off with a medical need. I had a nasty wart on my foot. My toe was plastered with warts. And then I was reading online, obviously, starved of oxygen, starved of moisture. It's the moisture that causes the warts.
Okay, so you researched it, and you're just like, I need to do this to get rid of this problem.
Yeah, exactly. So I figured the best thing to do is to not wear shoes, because obviously your feet won't get wet and or stay wet if you don't wear shoes. So that's initially how it started, and I started going to the gym and, not wearing shoes while I'm exercising. I wear my squat shoes, and when I switched out, I would just keep my socks on and just go around and work out in my socks.
Cool.
And then from that, in the summers, I would obviously start going to the parks and throwing footballs with my friends and all that stuff. And then I would take my shoes off while doing so. And I realized how pleasant it was to actually run around with your bare feet and not have to worry, about rolling an ankle, or it just feels more secure. And then from there, I kind of took it to the extreme, where I'd start going publicly barefoot as well. I'd go to school in my bare feet.
Nice.
I'd go on the O train, all that stuff, within reason. Obviously, some some restaurants or whatever won't let you go in barefoot.
Well,
it's considered awkward, which is very strange to me. But
yeah, it is, and that's a very interesting experience. The way you worded it, it's like I felt more stable. I felt I felt I was less likely to roll an ankle, and these are things that are counterintuitive for a lot of people. They're like, yo, man, I need my high tops to play basketball, or else I'm gonna roll my ankle. It's like, dude, you're literally detracting away from the sensory input that your foot is designed to take in that stops you from rolling an ankle. So it's so counterintuitive, but that's a very interesting perspective.
And I like how you did it just because it felt better, and it just felt like the right thing to do. And I think that, like you say, it turned into its own thing over time.
Yeah, there's not necessarily like any like, oh, I want to better my foot. There was nothing like that initially when I first started. When I go camping, for instance, I would be at a campsite. Rather than switching my boots in and out, I would just go barefoot, walk around on the rocks, and do all my chores, my camping chores, like collect firewood, collect water, all that stuff. I'd start doing that barefoot, and you'd realize that out in the forest, it's such a dynamic environment that I actually feel better on bare feet, because when I'm walking on rocks, I can use my toes, or when I'm leaning into a lake, I can see my toes just start squeezing the rocks, and then running in a field, for instance, I feel like my toes are like cleats, and rather than wearing like a soccer cleat, you can have your toes sink into the ground when you pivot, and that gives you a lot of stability, and it made me feel more confident in my ability to run and pivot and move.
And you're more aware too. Like you can't just blast through the woods and not give a shit where you're stepping or how you're stepping. Like it makes you be more aware of your environment, because you might step on something sharp or something shitty for your foot, and so. Yeah, it really is a more visceral experience going without shoes in the natural environment.
It's almost like a gateway to like mindfulness, because you have to be way more mindful. You can't just...
You realize that walking is like kind of like a skill. When you're walking through the woods and you have boots on, you just trample through all the twigs and all the sticks. But when you're walking with bare feet, you have to realize, oh, I could puncture my foot, or I could slip, or like there's certain things that you become more mindful of. And when you're walking, you have to spend more time focusing on where your steps are going, rather than just trampling through to get to your destination.
One thing I want to talk about is, like, you mentioned that it was kind of weird at certain times, like you couldn't go into certain restaurants, and obviously that's the case. But what was your experience in general, just being more in public with people's perceptions of you, or did you get anybody asking you things over your time spent barefoot, or things like that?
People just give you mainly weird looks. Like,
that's what I get too.
I would start wearing like the
five fingers,
the 5 finger shoes, and I liked those. Then I was like, you know what? I want to experience the environment, like the sensation of the environment. So when I started wearing bare feet to school, for instance, at 2 years university, I went to and from school on the O train.
That's awesome.
In bare feet.
Yeah.
And
do you go in winter too?
Winter is borderline. I'll go out in bare feet with winter, but like it's kind of a protection thing. Eventually your feet get numb, and like you need
100%
to heat them, right? You need to protect them in the environment.
And snow is sometimes sharp, like that, like crusty snow. I've tried to go barefoot a few times, and you're right. And I think the biggest thing there is like, when your foot goes numb, you don't know when you're doing shitty stuff to your feet.
Yeah.
So at that point, I think as like just a temperature barrier, and we talked about that with the history of footwear. Like people used to wear them for 2 reasons: stop your foot from getting cut, and stop your foot from being exposed to temperature extremes, whether that's hot or cold. Because that is of value as a foot protection piece of clothing. Right?
Yeah.
We just take it so extreme now. It's like now no one spends time barefoot, even in their house. The amount of people that wear shoes in their house is staggering. And so all these positive things that you discovered through just... Like, you started with a purpose, you started going barefoot, realized it felt better, you spent more time barefoot. No one explores that now, and they don't even know it's worth exploring. So that's kind of what we're about.
It's just odd, because now when you go barefoot, people like it's like almost going naked. It's like, what's this guy doing without shoes on? It's
I agree.
It's almost they look at you as a crazy person.
It's like I used to wear a poncho too. I was barefoot with a poncho on. That's how I used to go to school.
That's awesome.
That's when I came back from a trip from South America, so it was a bit more radical. But you just start noticing, even just simply walking to the bus station, rather than walking on the sidewalk, I'd walk on the median. So I'd feel the softness of the grass. You also start noticing things like spring and fall, the difference in the ground in the spring and the fall. So in the spring, the natives say, tread carefully in spring, because Mother Earth is pregnant. And you realize that when you're walking in the spring, it's saturated with water. It's all ready to bloom. And then in the summer, it dries up, and you hear more of a thud when you walk, because the ground's more dry in the summer.
Wow, that's so cool.
And then in the fall, it gets wet again, but it gets colder. So you start noticing things like that as well, where like you can tell the drought, grass is prickly in the middle of summer, but in the spring, grass is very soft. In the fall, you have the leaves, and that's very soft as well when you walk on. It's very comfortable to walk in the fall, because you have all the leaf coverage on the ground, which prevents the sticks from poking you and stuff like that.
And just think about how much I didn't even like really think of that, but think of how much information someone that lives, for example, in Peruvian Amazon or something like that, how much information they're getting about their environment, about the season, about the rainfall in the past X amount of time from their feet.
Exactly.
Those are sensors to like check, okay, the ground is like this, or this seed is in bloom, or that's so cool how it's like almost like a rudder to be more in touch with the environment.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a good analogy that we're just detached from our environment now. Right?
Absolutely. Like that 1 inch sole you put on your foot really disconnects you from,
makes a huge difference.
You realize that the human environment we live in the cities is really rough, and it's concrete, asphalt. It's not really meant for human beings. It's meant for our machines and for our cars and bicycles. It's not meant for us to walk around, really. It's meant
You're right.
for other things like industry and stuff like that.
And even like people come into the footwear shop that we have in Ottawa, we have this river rock tile. We put it in there purposely to be so that when people put on these quote unquote barefoot shoes, or we call them human shoes, they can experience texture. And it's
tactile,
like they can actually experience tactile texture through a piece of footwear that's just a thin layer on their foot to protect their foot, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that really shouldn't be that big of a deal is in people light up and they're like, it's like you just introduced them to some magical wizard tool. It's like, dude, those are just rocks and you're feeling them for the first time on your feet because you've never felt that before.
Yeah.
Now you're like, just looking down at your feet, you have some of the widest feet that I've ever seen. So is that something that, did you always have wide feet, or did you notice that they actually started to splay out more and change over time?
I noticed that I've always had wide feet, never fit into Nike or certain sneakers. To preface that, like I never wore shoes except for sneakers and work boots and sandals. I never wore dress shoes or anything like that. That just never interested me. For me, it's about comfort and practicality when it comes to my footwear.
Yeah.
So then when I noticed that I never fit into Nikes, I'd always bulge and break out at the side.
Yeah.
So I'd always
You're not alone.
Yeah, so I'd fit into Sauconys decently, moderately, but I'd have to wear them in because my foot's so wide, so I'd have to stretch them out in order and stuff like that. But I did realize that when I started going barefoot more often than not, like consciously barefoot, is that I had more control over my toes. So my feet were always wide initially, but now I can actually press the ground with all my toes. Almost individually, and I realized the dexterity of my feet becomes more like your hands, in which you have more control over your toes, and that's something I found that the bare feet helped me develop. Although I had wide feet initially, and my toes were pretty sprawled out initially, it allowed me to gain more control over the actual toes themselves, rather than just being able to move your big toe and your other toes all together.
Yeah, because you miss that in shoes. Like, number one, the shoe constricts your foot to the point where you can't even move your toes. Two, your toes have really nothing to do, right? They can't actually touch these different surfaces. And then three, the shoe literally compresses your toes together so that they basically lack movement altogether. One thing is, as you started to spend more time barefoot, did you notice the difference in the robustness and like the resilience to texture of your feet? Like, did things hurt initially? That, how long? Do you remember how long it took to kind of adjust? Because I found it was super quick. Like at the start, I was like, God damn, everything hurts to step on. And then after, I was like, I feel very little now.
I found it took maybe, because every year, because in the winter I wear more boots, right? So my feet get softer than during the summer. That's when they're the firmest, the most resilient.
Yep.
I found it takes about 1 or 2 hikes barefoot, and then you start to get that. You won't like tiptoe over rocks or gravel. You can just start walking on gravel and walking over rocks. And it doesn't impact your foot as much.
So I think let's actually veer down that road, because I know that you're a big fan of going out on hikes, but also going out on longer camping trips, and specifically even by yourself and just into nature. And maybe discuss kind of like what do you find beneficial about that in terms of both like physical and mental aspects of it.
And let's talk about the levels that you went through. Like the first time, how did you discover that going out on a solo camp was enjoyable? And then talk about some of the because I know you do some things and go on trips that most people would be like, I could never do that. And I want to just talk about like what made you want to push yourself to those points, and what points have you pushed yourself to, and what do you get out of those? Because I think, sorry, that's a lot of questions, but I find it so interesting.
So my parents never took me camping or anything like that, but I started to develop a fascination with it when I started reading up on like native cultures and Aboriginals and how they lived, and how what fascinated me about that is how apt they were to deal with the environment, and then how when I would go out, I'd feel cold and I feel weak into the environment. So I wanted to challenge myself to go out into the environment and explore. So my first camping trip was probably first year of university. I bought all my equipment and I went out by myself for 4 days. And then what I appreciated coming back from that was, you have the physical challenge. I did that hike. I probably did about 20K over 4 days. It's not too bad. You had a 35-pound sack on your back.
Yeah, and it probably wasn't flat ground either.
No.
So I mean, 20K, right? You shrug off 20K like it's nothing, but that's intense.
Yeah, and you're by yourself, right? So you have no one to pick you up, no one to encourage you. It's simply you and your head and your thoughts, and you have to get there. And then it's kind of the physical challenge is fine. Eventually, your body kind of shuts up. It just does the work it needs to do. Then from there, it comes a part of your mind where it's like, oh, I want to quit, or I want to stop and take a break, and you have to tell yourself, no, we're going to get there, and you just keep pushing yourself. And that sort of vulnerability of being exposed in the woods, it A, to the elements, and B, to yourself, which not many people have exposure to because people are scared of themselves.
For sure.
When you get out there, and it's liberating. It develops a degree of confidence in yourself. Like, I can do it. There's nothing that's going to stop me from doing except what I think in my own head.
Man, that would be like, hearing you say that makes me think that if you're a physician or if you're a health professional, whatever, you can get some people in and just be like, dude, you need to go on a friggin' hike. You need to go out for 3 days. You need to not bring your phone. You need to not bring music. You need to research the basics of how to survive in nature. Bring food with you, whatever. Like, maybe you don't have to go like straight up El Natural, but I think for a lot of people that would do so much for their mental and physical health that should be almost prescribed.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Well,
that would be so powerful.
It's called like forest bathing in Japan, and it actually is. There's like in Korea, there's actually centers that study just exposure to just going outside in nature. Yeah. And I think we're talking about a few different things. Like you can do it on a micro level, like day to day, if you just walk through the woods for an hour, but. But there's something to be said about like a longer term
to spend a night by yourself.
Just one night, like starting.
It's like
with that.
Not many people have that experience, and it's super challenging. And more often than not, it's like the first night when I did my first hike, I cried. I started missing people. Like, you started appreciating, my family, my friends. You started appreciating like the connection you have with the people around you, your dogs, your cats.
Wow, things that you might take for granted on another
all the time,
opportunity.
Right?
Yeah.
And then one of the biggest things when you come back and you have a shower. A warm shower, especially when you go winter camping. It's
you appreciate the fuck out of that shower.
You don't realize how cold you actually were until you come inside.
Yeah,
because your body temperature drops down and you adjust to that, and then it's just take it for granted to turn a knob and have hot water be sprayed on you. It's like it's a beautiful experience.
So what other camping trips have you done? I know you were out in BC a little bit.
I did some hiking. That was about 3 years ago. I did some hiking out in BC. I did a Skyline Trail in Jasper Park, and it was beautiful. It was a 4-day hike. I think it was about 70 kilometers in the Rockies. So it was interesting because in the valley, it was late August, early September. So the valley was warm, 15 degrees or whatever. But then when you start going up in altitude, you literally walk up into the snow because the tree line, and then the trees stop because you're above the tree line, and then you're walking in the snow, and then you walk on the ridges of mountains and you can see the slopes beside you, and it was just a spectacular hike. Wow! Saw some grizzly bears, black bears.
Okay, first time you see a grizzly bear, what the hell goes through your brain? Like, were you scared? Were you just appreciative of the environment? Because I feel like by then you were probably already acclimatized and more humbled in terms of being comfortable in the environment. But like, dude, I see a grizzly bear. I don't know what happens.
It's not the bears that scared me. It's more so the cats, mountain lions and stuff like that. Those are the animals you got to worry about.
Did you bring anything for defense?
You have to bring bear spray. Yeah.
Okay.
It's almost mandatory out in BC to have bear spray on you. When I saw the grizzly, he was quite a ways away. He was up. He was above me on a bank.
Cool.
So I just yelled, "Hey bear!" and he just looked at me, sniffed the air, and then he kind of
That's so badass.
So.
And what was your time like in? Because you were saying you went down to South America there. So
yeah,
what was that like?
So the hiking in South America is very challenging because of the altitude. So there was one hike I did. It was the Coco Canyon, and it's a 1 kilometer canyon. So you hike, you go 1K down, 1K up, just to get through the canyon. And that was super challenging because you have a shortness of breath the whole time. It's very hard to recover because of the lack of oxygen in the air.
So you're at altitude, even it doesn't matter what point of that 1K up. You're at altitude.
Yeah, so that was one hike I did that by myself, and I wasn't prepared for that, and that was just like literally 1 foot in front of the other and just get yourself to the top.
And do you do any training for these hikes? Like, do you basically
No,
so
I don't.
I mean, you're a pretty physical guy. It's not like you sit at a desk all day and you're like, I'm gonna go destroy a 70K hike, but no physical prep. And what did you find the biggest thing? It was just you got out of breath quicker, sort of thing.
Yeah, you fatigue really fast, and you have to take more breaks to catch your breath. In Peru, I also did another hike. It was the Inca Trail. It was up to Machu Picchu, and it was a 5-day hike in the mountains. And the highest we went there was 5,600 meters, and that was like
intense,
brutal. Yeah, that was very intense. Like you're not thinking about anything. You just like it's all about just
survive,
getting yourself up to that top because you have no choice.
So that's like
food too. Like, do you pack food or
pack
do you?
Food, yeah.
Okay,
yeah, it's basic stuff like berries, nuts. Stuff like that, cereals, grains, nothing. I don't usually bring meat because it spoils and attracts animals.
Yeah.
What you just said was interesting though, because it's like on those hikes you can't think about anything, and you were doing that for like 5 days, right?
5 days, yeah.
So that's like, would you say it's almost like 5 days of thinking about minimal stuff?
Pretty much, and like thoughts do occur to you. Like you'll get to the top of the mountain, you'll be like, oh god, I gotta go down there now.
Yeah.
But then you start the process of going there, and eventually, like, oh, I'm here. It's just kind of like it's weird like that.
Would you say that that's kind of one of your forms of meditation, just getting out in nature by yourself?
Absolutely, I feel.
And
yeah.
did you stumble upon that naturally, or did you have that in mind going into it, or did you just figure that out on the?
I just figured that out. Like hiking on your own kind of gave me that, because you have no one to talk to, right? So it's literally all in your head. There's like there's the people outside, and there's the person inside your head. And then when you're out in the woods by yourself, you're only dealing with that person inside, right? You're not having to present yourself in any fashion because you're in a social setting or anything like that, right? It's literally just you.
So
you're
you're
vulnerable and exposed.
It's almost like your ego. You can put it on hold for a bit because you don't have to appease to the people.
Yeah.
You don't have to play that role back in society,
Or you
right?
just break that ego down, because it's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how important you are, what you've done. It's like, all that matters is that you're thinking of how to survive and accomplish this goal that you set out to do. So that alone would be like, would put your ego in check big time, I think.
Well, just kind of, I think it just eliminates it, right? Altogether.
Pretty much. You're not
Yeah.
thinking, like, it's a very different type of thought out there. It's like when I'm sitting by a rock having my lunch, it's like I'm not thinking like about worries or stressors or anything like that. It's super calm, super peaceful. You start to feel like the rocks and the streams. It sounds kind of weird, but kind of like your friends. They're kind of like they're one with you. Like
It doesn't sound that weird to me, but to the average person, I think that they're like, what are these guys talking about?
You realize that, like, trees are alive, plants are alive, but like mountains are alive, streams are alive. Like, there's this energy that flows through like the whole environment, and then it's kind of a way of reconnecting with that energy and realizing like this is what life is. Like all the stuff back home in the human environment is all spectacle and not necessarily reality. But when you go out there, that is what's real. That is reality. Is when you're out there.
You're right.
There's nothing else to that.
And we're
that.
so disconnected from it. I mean, just thinking of what you're saying and like envisioning it as you're saying it, it's almost like it's become this magical world, but it's only like that because we're so removed from it. And I find that, like, even certain periods that, like, if you're doing psychedelic substances and you're in nature and you're that literally, for me, brings out that connection to,
absolutely,
wow, that bug that's walking there, you almost understand its perspective and the fact that it has consciousness, or that plant has, whatever you want to call it, an energy, a consciousness, or whatever,
purpose or a meaning or something.
Exactly. And you're like, you have like this different level of respect for the natural environment when you're forced to interact with it that closely. And I think that's very powerful. Anytime we do psilocybin mushrooms and we're in nature, you come away from that with an extremely different form of respect for just life, what shit actually matters, what doing a trip like that does to you mentally, and the fact that you need to prioritize. I need to spend more time not in cell phone concrete land, and I need to spend more time in like natural areas.
And I think that even like regardless, just nature itself, if you go out in nature, there's this thing where you can like almost look at the life that you've made back home almost, and you're like, oh, like, because it's rare that we get that outside perspective and we can like look at things from a big global picture. But when you're out there, you can kind of be the observer of it all, and it just kind of promotes that. So I think that there's little glimpses that we can get only day to day of that, but I think most people never get that. So then it's like, oh shit, you have a day, you have 2 days, you have 4 days to really like look at the thing that you've created back home and maybe make some changes or adjustments to it based on things you don't like, or you want to change, or you see that are causing mental or physical trouble to yourself. So I think it's just being in nature itself is almost like a psychedelic thing, and it kind of helps you kind of reframe reality a little bit.
Part of my worldview gives me the impression too, when I go hiking, it feels like I'm going home. It sounds odd, but it's like when I'm there and I'm just like, one time I was hiking, I was just eating some cashews, I look across, a deer is over there eating its lunch too, and just like I had a connection with the deer. We saw each other, he didn't really care that much, we were separated by a body of water, and we just enjoyed the space. Like, what, it was nothing more to it. It was just very peaceful.
To that deer, you're another animal.
Exactly.
You're another animal surviving and just wandering about. How much that deer actually thinks of, who the hell knows? But it's to see that mirror perspective of like, okay, that deer sees me. He's not threatened. I'm not doing anything threatening, and all he sees is the same thing I see him doing. It's like we're just existing.
Yeah, that's what I find beautiful about it too. Is animal. Like, you realize, like, some people with depression and stuff like that, like, oh, I'm nothing. I don't have any value. It's like, okay, go approach a bear. Go approach a deer. He knows right away that you're something. You have that value, right? That meaning. He recognizes that. Yeah. And that's kind of a way of like reinforcing that. Is that like, I may sometimes have bad days, or you're depressed, or you feel like there's no meaning, or you don't have any value or anything like that. But go out to the woods and things recognize you. Like you exist. You're there. Like you're not just some shadow.
And let's be clear that everyone has those days. Okay, like people that are, I think it's easy for people that are anxious or depressed or have those terrible days where they're not acknowledged or certain triggers set them off. They assume that they're the only ones that feel like that. I have days like that. We all have days like that. It's how you manage it. And I think like just going out to where you disconnect from all the things that can make you feel shitty. When you look on Instagram, you see 10 people that look like you have the best life in the world. You don't see the shittiness of their life because it's not on there. So it can really put like this crazy standard to where you're like, oh my God, I'm worthless. My life doesn't look like that.
Yeah.
And when you go in nature, that disappears.
And there's something to be said about, I think, driving positive psychology from the animal part of you upwards, as opposed to the highest conscious part downwards, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people are like trying to think themselves into a happy state.
Yeah.
But if you can put yourselves into a better state by using your body or putting it into the environment, right? Because we've had conversations about that before. It's like, and that's a deep, long-standing, known fact that if you connect with your body, and who was the philosopher you were talking about that was very adamant about actually getting people to connect with their bodies because that drives a healthy mind.
It was the Greek perspective in general, the ancient Greek philosophy in general. They started, they had a regimented, educational program, and it started off with gymnastics. Gymnastics were the fundamental aspects of one's education because you could determine a mastery of the body. And when you have mastery of the body, you can master the mind. If that happens vice versa, then you're actually doing yourself a disservice.
Well, what did gymnastics mean? What did you say the meaning of gymnastics
It's like
was?
naked exercise. Like gymno means naked. So it's like a naked activity. And they used to perform gymnastics naked in ancient Greece. And that's kind of, the scholarly class or like the high class when they were being educated, that's how they would start is with
So it was
mastery of the
body first, and then
you move
like
to
you
the
said
mind.
before, it's like, okay, you can learn algebra, but if you have no connection to your body, is that even purposeful? Whereas if you develop your body, learning algebra afterwards is not that hard when your body and mind have developed to a point where it's now ready to consume other knowledge that might not be physical.
And it goes back to my point there when I said when I'm hiking and sometimes it's one foot in front of the other. I can't think about anything else, right? And that gymnastics and working out kind of gives you a glimpse of that where it's like if I have to perform some sort of task or physical task, I have to silence the mind. Like, shut up. I'm going to do it anyways, even though you don't want to, even though I'm not motivated to do so. I'm going to do it, and it gives you that connection to kind of master your body, to have control over your body, rather than it saying, "Oh, I'm hungry" or whatever. Just kind of pushing things up to you.
It's like the gateway to your mind, right?
Yeah.
And that's probably why they were so adamant about it. And it's like once you can show me that you can control this physical body, then we can talk about learning other things. But I think it's just having the priorities in place, and a lot of people have that completely flipped on its head, where that disconnect with the body doesn't allow for the conditions to have a healthy mind, right? Because
in order to condition the body, you have to condition the mind in some sense too, right? So you have to have that motivation or that the ability to focus, which is what you need to condition the mind, right? Which is a mental exercise. So once you've mastered the body through exercising a mental focus,
100%.
when you come to actual rational faculties like mathematics and language and all that stuff, it's going to be much easier for the student because he already knows how to focus his mind.
Well, look at society now. We're literally training people to be shitty at focusing on things. With the constant availability of novelty, we're literally being trained to not be able to focus on one specific thing for a fixed period of time, right? Go into any university, probably when someone's studying, they're reading a book, or I don't know if they're reading a book, but the book's in front of them. They have their headphones on. They're listening to some sort of audio input, maybe music. They have their cell phone in front of them. They're going through Instagram. They cannot focus. They're like literally being in a room by themselves with nothing would probably freak them out because they've never actually had to do that, and they've almost lost the ability to just shut outside noise out. And I think as physical therapists, like that is part of our the name physical therapy or physiotherapy and what people think that is so far from what it can and should be, right? They think, okay, my shoulder hurts, I go to see a physio. It's like a physical therapist should help you reconnect with what it feels to even understand your body.
Your
to feel
physicality.
Your body.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's like, that's why we have a friggin' float tank in our clinic. It's because taking away exterior sensory input can be in itself physical therapy to reconnect with your mind. With like, that's all you're doing is going in a tank with nothing else around you. And I think that's
or any
powerful.
given thing with your body, right? Because in order to use your body by it, just you have to be using your mind, like you say. You can't disconnect the two. And the better you get at your using your body, that just by default almost means that your mind has done the work to get your body there.
You're tuning your mind.
Tuning your mind in the process of tuning your body. So so it's like, because there's this thing where people don't like to look at like somebody who developed a lot of like physical strength or physical endurance. It's like, yeah, it's impressive, but it's like, do you know how strong their minds have to be to get there?
Yeah.
It's not their bodies that's impressive. That is impressive, and everyone wants to just look at that. Oh, this person ran 500 miles in so and so days. It's like, okay, cool. Do you understand their mind? Like, that's what really interests
That's
me.
what got them there. Yeah.
So
Right, you're
their
like,
body's
what
like
goes
the
through this
rapper.
person's mind to allow them to do that feat?
Yeah.
Because that's not a normal feat right there.
Yeah.
So it's like, how does this person think? And then you kind of go deeper into that, and it's like, wow, you probe a little deeper, and all of these people have some crazy stuff going on in their minds to allow them to accomplish
Good
these
or
feats.
bad. It can be good or bad.
Yeah, you can have demons too. Yeah.
Who was that philosopher you were talking about there that was on the darker side of things, and you said you were a fan of, and
Oh, Marquis de Sade.
yeah.
Okay, Marquis de Sade. He's writing in the 1700s. His books are very violent, full of like rape and pedophilia. It's like very disgusting books. They were actually banned in France and burnt. And
Really?
it's very, very interesting biography.
How did you come across this guy, and what makes you what makes you find he's like be interested in what this guy has to say?
I came across him just out of happen chance, and my friend read one of his books, 120 Days of Sodomy is the first book I read of his.
Okay.
And it's about him and the libertines. They take a bunch of people and they go to a chateau and they just like rape and sodomize, and it's all this sexual, vagrancy that they perform and all that stuff. And it makes you realize that like there's it's so complicated because it brings in Nietzsche too, but there's morality. There's an element of morality that makes humans weak. And then Marquis de Sade and philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche with the Übermensch and the Overman and all that stuff, he's kind of challenging morality and says that humans are inherently strong, powerful creatures. Then we have these social systems that we impose on ourselves to kind of limit the powerful from overtaking the weak. It's kind of that Darwinistic type thinking. And as an example, I was reading another one, is a native book, like a article written by a native, and he's talking about how you take a domesticated dog and you compare it to a wolf, and the difference between the domesticated version and then the wild version. The wild version, almost in every case, is going to be stronger, faster, more apt, and possess more self-confidence.
Yeah, I'm betting on that wild wolf in a fight any day.
Same with like wild goats and sheep and all these animals that we've domesticated. The domesticated version compared to the natural variant.
Yeah.
The domesticated version is typically of a lesser value, or however you measure that value, whether it's strength or hunting ability or all that.
So it's almost
stuff,
like
right?
when you go on a hike, you're trying to tap into the undomesticated human and
Yes.
kind of just see through that lens how it feels.
Yeah, so it's like a lot of my readings and the influence in my thinking is kind of trying to tap into that undiscovered self, this nasty beast which is inherent in all of us, and how if we accept that beast, it's actually beneficial to us, become stronger and more confident individuals. So the analogy between like the dog and the wolf is that the native mate, he says that humans have become like that too. Humans now are domesticated, and we become weak like a dog would be compared to a wolf. And if you look at older tribes or native tribes, ones that exist and ones that existed in the past, when you look at them, like a chief, for instance, they have this like inherent confidence about them, like this proudness, right? And that's not something we don't find very often in our culture. I find today, because we're all we have all these systems and morality kind of. We're struggling with, but inherently we should be very proud and confident creatures, like as individuals. But we don't see that very often. That's always fascinated me a little bit, which is why I've gone into hiking and stuff like that, because it kind of develops that.
And it's almost like you have to go far out of your way now to please the beast side of you, right? And it's also like you can't. You got to realize that it's there, like you were just saying. A lot of people, maybe it's this subconscious thing that scares them. And they get these little urges in themselves, but they're like, oh, what was that urge? I don't like it. Let's put it to the side.
Yeah.
But it's like these urges are very natural, and you need to feed these urges in healthy ways,
Exactly.
like going out in nature or exerting your body or doing strength training or lifting heavy things or just surviving. I think the biggest thing for you is just go out and try to survive for a few days.
Yeah.
You're going to see what your beast is like actually meant to do.
Yeah.
And it's like it's meant to carry some stuff, make fires, make food,
Yeah, we're
search
workhorses
for stuff.
pretty much, yeah.
Workhorses. And it's like, oh, and then like along the way, it's like, this actually makes me feel good,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's the weird thing. It's like, why does this make me feel so good when I do this?
Yeah, and you have to acknowledge the beast. I think that's
Absolutely.
like right, like so what we've done, these cultural norms that we've imposed, it's almost like what's normal is very unnatural. So, well, shoes are an example of that. What's normal in footwear is so unnatural for humans, it's crazy. It's why we're breaking down. But it's almost like, okay, you have this caged wild beast, and we put it in, or you have a wild beast and we put it in the cage. And the cage is society and our norms and cultural things that we just adopt as normal. And you got two options. Number one, you take the beast for a walk once in a while, and you make sure that you're doing it responsibly. So you let it, you let it be in its natural environment and expend some of the energy. And it's almost like you are the beast that you're letting out, but you're kind of observing it and seeing how it acts and seeing, okay, I understand that. And then you put it back into the cage. Otherwise, that beast is going to keep biting at the cage, and it's going to break out and probably do something really stupid or nasty. Yeah. So it's not suppress the beast. It's, okay, I understand that this is part of me. Now I can understand how to let it kind of do what it's designed to do in a controlled environment where it lets me connect with the beast, but I still try and stay within, this bigger archetype of, okay, don't kill people, don't rape people, but understand that that's part of me.
I think that if you just try to simply suppress the beast, it's going to come out. That is going to come out. It's like a container filled to the brim that's about to ooze out. It's going to come out in different areas, whether you like it or not. If you don't acknowledge it, right, it's going to come out. Maybe that's where all these kind of like pathological things come from in
fetishes,
people's mind. Things that were just like, oh, that's coming out in ways. I'm trying to stuff it down further and further. But if you just kind of let it out of the cage in a controlled doses, like you say, then you can kind of get yourself back on track.
It's like the suppression of it is what creates the perversion of it. Otherwise, the impulse itself is not perverted.
Yeah, that's a beautiful statement.
It's like
very
your
true.
Thought, your head's your own. You can think whatever you want. It's not bad to have certain thoughts. It's not it's to act on them in perverted ways is what's bad or socially reprehensible. But it's like Wilhelm Reich. He does a study about sexual morality, and he goes to Papua New Guinea and he looks at that old tribe there and how they perceive sex and how sex is developed amongst youth and stuff like that. And in our culture today, we tend to think kids aren't sexual, but in the reality of it, kids are very sexual. They're developing and they have those impulses, although they may not identify as being sexual as like an adult would. They're impulses for the kid. So what he studied in Papua New Guinea, he saw that there was a tribe there, and there were the idea of pedophilia was almost non-existent in this tribe. Okay, and then the way he saw it, the way he understood it, is that kids in this culture, 5, 6, 7 years old, were all playing with each other, exploring each other of the opposite sex, same sex, doesn't really matter. And the parents encouraged it, whatever, go ahead and have fun. And he was thinking that as kids in the Western culture, we're always told, cooties and stay away from each other and don't explore each other and stuff like that. So then when you get to adolescence or adults, you actually haven't released those impulses that you have as a kid, which are sexual impulses. So you get perverted, and that's when you get the emergence of pedophilia, which is basically an individual who's stuck in that infantile sexual impulse. Wow. And it has not been able to express it. And then you see pedophilic impulses all over our culture. For instance, a shaved pubic mound on a woman is a pedophilic impulse.
Wow, that's very true.
The only people who have no pubic hair are kids. Yeah. Right. So to have that attraction towards a shaved vagina is a pedophilic tendency. Yeah. But not everyone recognizes that, right?
Now porn just made that the status quo.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I never thought about it in that respect. So it's like, yeah, and it's so true. It's so frowned upon. It's like, it's like roughhousing as a kid.
Exactly.
Okay, you have no respect for physical contact or violence because it's been suppressed. It's like and clearly these kids aren't doing messed up things by interacting with each other in a sexual way. Yeah. They're just not being sheltered to the point where things that shouldn't be weird become weird. And then,
like you say, just like fighting that ancient. If you look at other species, like so many different mammals have their version of roughhousing and play that involves physicality and when you look at these species, it looks like they're fighting, but it's not a fight. It's a playful fight. It's the fight that you see between dogs, right? So you'll see this all the time, and we think nothing of it, but we suppress that and we don't allow it, and it's getting worse and worse. But that shows you not only how to use your physical body, but it just gets these urges out, and it kind of prepares you for like, here's how I can handle myself, and like we have the urge to be very physical as well, and even stuff like throwing rocks. Like every time I go out into the forest, I'll throw stuff, and something's very satisfying about that too, because it's like, that's a part of our history, just like hunting and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's very important among social animals too. It teaches me how to use my body. If I'm roughhousing with my friend, teaches me how to use my body. Also teaches me the limits of other bodies too. Yeah, this will hurt, this will kill, and it kind of gives me that perspective. And what's too much?
Exactly, and I witnessed that firsthand. So Ella and Luna, so two young dogs that were in a household that I used to live in, they would play fight, and what you'd see is it would escalate. Like it would start out pretty like easy, and then it would get intense to the point where you're like, I don't know if I should step in. This is getting super intense. And then something would happen where one of the dogs would kind of screech a little bit because they got hurt, and instantly the other dog stopped and went over and licked their face. It was like, oh, sorry, okay, we found the limit. Now we're going to stay under that. But these dogs that are never allowed to interact with other dogs, those are the dogs at the park that bite another dog. They're not trying to be evil. They just have no understanding of how strong their mouth is or how to interact physically. And you see that too with humans all the time. And I think that, bringing it back to the sexual side of things, I think people have this weird guilt when it comes to sexuality because it's been suppressed, and they almost think, okay, this is what everyone should act like. I don't feel that way. I feel these urges. I feel this and that. So you feel this guilt, even though that's normal. Everyone else is feeling that shit too. Just no one talks about it. So you never realize that's actually what normal is, right? And what we're doing is this very skewed version of what we're trying to like sugarcoat things and trying to avoid conversations that need to be had about sexuality or about violence or about harm to other people that aren't being had, and so we have zero education on them. And so there's no wonder you see abuse of in those realms.
Mass confusion. It's like we're all just running around with these unmet urges, and then it just, like you say, it just creates all these other offshoot areas. So
actually, one thing I want to talk about, just bring it back to the hike part. One curious thing: when you go on these hikes, you go on a 4-day hike, you discover, you interact with your mind in a different way. You interact with nature. What happens when you come back to normal life? Like, how do you reconcile what you just experienced and then go back into normal life and experience it with joy and not be, depressed that you're like, fuck, that was so good. How do I go back to this? Like, how do you basically take what you learned being out on a 4-day solo hike and implement it in day-to-day life so that day-to-day life is still a fulfilling and happy environment?
How do you integrate it?
There?
Yeah. It's very cliche, but it's really small details that I pay attention to, like waking up in the morning and having a breath of fresh, cold, crisp air. Like this, you focus on small things like that, which are always like when you're hiking. That's pretty much what all you're focusing on is like the beauty of the trees and the blossoms and all that stuff. And then you bring it when you come back to the city. You kind of try and bring that back too. It's like, it's a little cloudy today, but it's like, it's still a beautiful day. There's still aspects of it beautiful. It's raining today. When you're camping, it doesn't matter if it's raining or not. You're still hiking, right? So it's like here, it's not going to prevent me from doing anything because it's raining.
And you don't dwell on the negatives that really aren't that bad.
It's weather. I can't control weather. Why am I going to get upset about weather? It's something I can't control, right? So I'll control my perspective on it. It's still a beautiful day. Yeah, it's raining out, but it's still beautiful. Like it's still a part of a climate, which is something worth experiencing.
Wow. So it's almost like it expanded your horizons so that a small thing that might be a negative to the average person that never goes out is no longer even on the radar of negativity because you've experienced this whole different perspective. So interesting. So it actually enhances your experience of day-to-day reality.
So I find it helped a lot with the winter, for instance, going outside and do winter activities, go winter camping and stuff like that. I like the winter now. I like the challenge of it, how the vulnerability of it, how I realized when I was hiking in Jasper, there's a difference between feeling cold and being cold. Yeah. So you're always going to feel cold in the winter. It's just cold outside. But to actually be cold, not many of us experience.
Yeah, and I have a new threshold on your continuum now.
Exactly. I had one night in Jasper. I was literally huddled in a ball. It's like shivering, just waiting for the sun to break because I was not prepared and I was cold. Wow. And that is cold. That's not feeling cold. That's being cold. So when I go outside and I feel a little bit of wind on my face, whatever, it's winter.
We talked about that the other day. It's a treat to have people complain about the weather all the time, especially as a physio. Weather always comes up because you're trying to make small talk with someone when you're treating them or whatever. Everyone bitches and moans about the weather. It's like,
I don't get
cold is a treat. It is a treat where it's like you have this thing where all you have to do is walk out your front door and you can have an immediate challenge to center yourself. Like you were talking about the other day. You just grab a kettlebell, go out for a walk in the cold. You don't want to do it. It's not fun, but you do it because you know that the rewards you're going to get from that, both mentally and physically, are worth the struggle in the short term.
And it feels great. And guess what? I know where my house is. It's 20 minutes down the sidewalk. It's
like there's a warm shower.
You're not going to perish. Yeah,
exactly. So having that in mind, it's like, let's do something a little challenging today because you know what, my safe spot is right there. So
it's pretty funny. The first time I go winter camping with my buddy Dan and his 2 huskies, and we set up camp, dug a shelter into a snowbank. We sleep in the snowbanks. And then I take my boots off to dry off. I put the boots by the fire. I go inside the shelter to kind of warm up a little bit. I'm like, oh, the fire's picked up a bunch. I look outside, both our boots are lit on fire. So we burnt both our boots to the sole. I had no boot left. And thankfully we're only like, 40 minutes away from the car, so it wasn't too bad. The first time going out, didn't want to be too
That's a good lesson.
too far. So we have to take our clothes off, wrap our feet with all their clothes, and just run back. And
that's so cool.
But it's a lesson to be learned, because if I was 3 days into the woods and I burnt my boots, I'm kind of screwed. Like,
that's a good time to learn
that's
that
an
lesson.
emergency, So
I'm sure the dynamic of having canines there was probably super cool too. Like I always think of this whenever we are out like on a lustful hike. I'm like, I would love to go on a hike and like an overnight hike with Memphis, because having a dog there that can sense threats in the environment, like reading off the dog's body language of how they interact in like a natural environment to both threats or just how they react, and just having the safety of, I have a beast that is friends with me that can take on anything, that can keep me warm. Like that would be. I think that'd be a really cool experience to go with dogs.
Yeah, because the first night I spent out in the woods by myself, I was scared shitless actually, because you hear so many noises in the woods. What's that?
True.
What's this? What's that? What's this? And you can't sleep because you're all worried about a bear creeping up on you and stuff like that. And
Your hearing probably tunes in so hardcore too.
You hear everything, right? Because it's nothing. In the winter, you can hear the snow fall on the ground. It's so quiet. The winter. What I appreciate about the winter is the quietness. People don't realize that when you go to the woods and you spend a night in the woods in the winter, it is quiet.
Yeah.
Nothing to be heard.
You realize all the other animals are taking shelter too.
Exactly. In the summer, you hear chirps and crickets and frogs and all this stuff, right? But in the winter, it's nothing, and that's it's humbling. It's like, oh my god,
it's a beautiful thing.
How often do you hear silence?
Yeah.
But yeah, you freak yourself out. What's this? What's that? And then eventually, you have to calm yourself down. Like, you know what? Like, if a bear comes in the camp, I'm going to have to deal with it then, right? I'm not going to freak myself out until that happens. So,
and it's not creating negative things. People have a bad habit of doing that. They think worst case scenario. They think about negative things before they even friggin' happen.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because that's almost like a snapshot of what happens to us in modern society too. Instead, you're saying in order to deal with being alone in nature there, you had to shut your mind up and say, okay, let's just deal with the present moment and be like, okay, whatever happens to come, if there's an obstacle that comes, then I'm going to deal with it when that obstacle comes. Yeah. And you're like, until then, you were so preoccupied with your thoughts. Now, if you bring that back into like modern society, people have trouble being in that present moment, and they're thinking about, so the bear and all these things that you were thinking about, that's in the form of like their bills and there are all these other problems. But that takes them away from like, hey, I should be just right and doing what's in front of me right now, and whatever happens to come along this way, then I'll deal with it then, and that's how I get through the whole thing, or else my mind's going to be in this weird...
It's one thing to plan where it's like, for the bear, for instance, okay, I have a knife and a whistle in my tent. Okay, bear comes, I'll wail on my whistle and try and scare him away. Right? I have a plan. Yeah. But then just psych myself out until I have to implement that plan. It's a waste of energy.
Exactly.
That's almost like a stoic, piece of stoic philosophy there. There's no point in overthinking something that you can't change or control.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good, thing to get into now, and just kind of delve into some of the popular thinkers that you enjoy reading or that you've studied over time.
Do you remember how you got into, like, when or how or what made you get into looking into? Because I mean, the average person, you say Nietzsche, they're like, what the hell's a Nietzsche? Yeah. They just it's not something they were ever exposed to. I know that I started learning about Stoic stuff through a podcast, and then you bought the Daily Stoic. You're like, yeah, it's a good read, and then that made me go down a rabbit hole to where, like, now I try and read on a daily basis something that whether it's Marcus Aurelius' meditation or the Emperor's meditations or whatever, different variations of a book that just kind of shows you, like, that's so powerful. That's been hugely powerful for me, both from, like, whether it be an ego point of view or a just understand what you can and can't change and don't dwell on things that you can't change, whatever it is. How did you start to kind of go down that path and then talk about, like, the most influential people that you like to follow? You already talked about what was that guy's name?
Marquis de Sade.
Marquis de Sade, and then some other guys like Nietzsche and how did you get into that? Who have been the biggest influences, and what are the biggest takeaways that you've gotten from that?
So probably about grade 7 and 8, I started reading a lot of science books. So like quantum physics, astrobiology and stuff like that, right? And then I found,
just interested me,
yeah. And then I found that it didn't really give me a meaningful perspective on my own life. Like, it gave me a perspective on the world and the universe and how it functions.
But it's very abstract, that kind of stuff.
Kind of very abstract, right? And it left me kind of with a void, an existential void, which every adolescent goes through. But and then I switched over to philosophy. I've read a book called The Human Touch by Michael Frayn, and that kind of really sparked an interest in philosophy. And then from that, I decided to go to university in philosophy. But it was just mainly finding perspective and finding value, which I think everyone goes through, and that's very much a part of growing up, is finding value and
I think
significance.
most people, it's a continuous journey. They're still doing that.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then it got me into philosophy, and then from philosophy it branched out. I started studying Buddhism and religion and theology and stuff like that. And you start seeing this overarching issue in which the problems that we face today as like humans in terms of finding meaning and significance, humans have faced that throughout all of our existence, pretty much. And if you go back to the pre-Socratics and Plato and Aristotle and Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics, Epicureans, and all those ancient schools of thought, you realize that we have answers to these questions, and they've been developed thousands of years ago, but somehow
they've been cultivated already.
Oh yeah, like we've answered these questions, but now in today's day, we don't tend to have those answers available to us. We're still struggling, right? And that's what kind of drew me into it. It's like, wait, our ancestors thought about this and they had an answer to this, then why are we still struggling with this today? And that kind of brought me into the history of philosophy. And what I like about philosophy in particular is that you can see an overarching, like, unity of thought and how things evolve from Plato to Aristotle to Marcus Aurelius, for instance. You can kind of see the connections and where they give and take from each other and how they develop certain lifestyles. Because back in the day, is a book I read by Pierre Hadot. It's What is Ancient Philosophy? And you're basically arguing that philosophy back in the day is a way of life. It's not some topic about what it means to know something or does life have value. These certain stereotypical philosophical questions you see is very much a contemporary take on philosophy. But back then, during Plato's time and Aristotle's time, philosophy was very much a way of life. It was a commitment to wisdom, right? It was a love for knowledge, which is what philosophy means. Philos means love, Sophia means knowledge, or wisdom, sorry. So to be a philosopher is to love wisdom. Wow. And it was a practice in approaching that wisdom.
Yeah, it's not something you say, oh, I'm full philosophical or I'm a stoic. It's like people know it by how you act. Like you have to live it. It's not a trophy or a medal. It's like a daily thing to implement in your life and to structure your life around.
It's not an answer to a question. It's the ability to structure questions that can develop meaningful answers.
Yes.
That's what a philosophy is. It's not, I know the answer to the meaning of life. I don't know the answer, but I can ask pertinent questions that can give me meaningful answers.
And it's dynamic too. It changes.
Absolutely.
Right? It's like who you are now and the way you think about things, the way you think about reality or happiness, whatever it might be. The more information you get, the better you can either confirm or challenge the way you're thinking about things. And I think you have some of those moments that are like almost earth-shattering where you read something you're like, oh my God. Yeah. This just like completely changed the schema of how I think of life in a good way. At the time, it's like, holy shit, this sucks. But it's like, okay, now I have a bit of a different path to kind of go down.
That's why I like Nietzsche, because Nietzsche is very challenging like that.
And would you say, actually, let's dive into Nietzsche in a sec, but like, would you say that philosophy is at the root of critical thinking?
Absolutely. It's the mother of all knowledge. Absolutely. Okay. Without doubt. Yeah.
Because I think that's a missing element, because we're so quick to go to like science, like you say, and it's like we worship science now, but we're missing the underlying building blocks of that, which is like, how do you think about things, and can you structure good questions, and like what's your rational thinking capabilities?
Well, I find it fascinating because every topic you study at university, archaeology, astronomy, you can add the word philosophy of in front of, and you get into a philosophical discussion, right? PhD stands for a doctorate in philosophy in the topic you're in. So like that's the way we distinguish the highest echelon of academia, is by calling him a philosopher, PhD in medicine. He's a doctor in philosophy of medicine. That's the way it's structured, right? So it's interesting because you can take any topic, like science, for instance, the philosophy of science. Okay, how do we structure our models? How do we understand whether our models actually do reflect a reality? And like these are such questions that science doesn't necessarily have to deal with, but philosophers can deal with to see the value of science. Is science actually accurate in depicting the world? That may be something we'd never be able to answer,
So in terms of Nietzsche, what do you find interesting about him?
So I like how aggressive he is and how in your face he is. I actually lost sleep reading Nietzsche because he's very powerful like that, and he attacks the Christian morality and the Christian faith very, very, very strongly. And it basically comes down to pity, and how pity is very destructive to have. To have pity for someone is actually very bad for you to do. For instance, you walk by a homeless man in the street, you say, "Oh, I pity him," or I feel sorry for him. What you're actually saying is, "Thank God I'm not him," right? Yeah. So you're shrouding this bestial part of ourselves, which is like I'm better than him. You're shrouding it with this notion of pity and making it seem. It's like mercy. It's like this idea of mercy. Nietzsche's very challenging because he writes in aphorisms. He doesn't write in actual text, and you have to kind of like decipher his aphorisms.
God damn, I got to read Nietzsche.
But read his "Thus Spoke Zarathustra," and it's like it's a book, but it's very much it's very interesting.
It sounds like it's something that you got to like take time to like digest each sentence almost and trying
Absolutely.
to piece that into how does this even fit in my reality,
Yeah.
and what is he trying to say here? Because it's probably like a Rorschach almost. It's like that's going to rub off. Your interpretation of that is going to be based on your life experience and the way you think about life right now, and obviously that will be dynamic and change. But it's like I almost feel like if I read it, I'm gonna get 1% of it at the start, or be able to place 1% of it, and then that might change a little bit of the way you're thinking. And the next time you read it, you get like 5% of it.
Nietzsche is one of those books that you can read. You'll get maybe 1%, 2% out of it.
Yeah.
You'll read another book and be like, oh wait, that makes sense. You go back to Nietzsche, read it again. Oh my God, that's what he's talking about. You kind of fill it in as you continue to educate yourself, right?
Cool.
And the self-education is very much important
Yeah.
when it comes to philosophy. But what I think about Nietzsche is basically what it comes down to is that humans are weak because we have moralities, and then we subject ourselves to these notions of good and evil. And Nietzsche is basically challenging us to shatter those values and say there's no such thing as good and evil. That's actually just a human notion.
Yeah.
All there is human beings, which is the Übermensch, the overman, one who overcomes himself. I'm not human. I am. It's like to be human is to limit yourself to certain characteristics and traits. And he says that's the weakness of human beings, is that we have to actually eliminate this notion that I am man and just be a beast, pretty much, right?
It's like our obsession with structure, our obsession with understanding, whether it's death or and finding some way to compartmentalize and feel comfortable that you're like, okay, I understand death, or else you're scared of it, right? It's like to get rid of the fear of the fact that you're a beast, you call yourself a man, and then you're like, okay, I have structure, I can put what I am into a container, I know what it is, and when something shatters that container, you're like, holy shit.
It's
okay.
like there's little thought experiments I do to myself. It's like you see a serial killer on the news or whatever. It's like, oh, I'm not that. But no, I see myself in that guy. That's me. I'm not. I haven't killed anyone, but he's still a human being, and he has subject to the same impulses and faculties as I am myself.
And if you were exposed to what he was exposed to his whole life,
I could have been him.
Exactly.
So
I think that's one thing that I've changed a little bit lately is like, even that the homeless thing that you're talking about, trying not to
Judge.
trying not to judge, but also just acknowledging like, man, that guy's probably had a really bad roll of the dice, and if I had that same roll, I would probably be there. Maybe I'd be dead. Maybe I would who knows?
Or even I hate to bring it up, but the Nazism. It's like, how could the Nazis do that to the Jews? It's like, well, if you were in that position as a human being, you probably more likely than not you would have done the same thing.
Exactly.
Right. To think yourself as being better than that is a psychological error.
Yeah,
it's not true.
It's to give yourself closure. It's like it's to
make yourself a man, a human, right? Which is the challenge.
And it's all based on these decisions we just make over time. Because if you just make a series of different decisions, you're going to be you're going to be a different person. The person that you create is going to be different over time. But I think it's up to you to just make sure that that person is going on the right path along the way. So I don't know if he touches on that at all too. Like it's just.
Nietzsche's all over the place. He's very difficult to read.
No, exactly.
He's super difficult.
I'm getting in on that. We'll do another podcast in a year from now. I'm going to read some Nietzsche and we'll see if I can contribute to this conversation a little bit more, because it is, I mean, probably for the average person, it's not even something of interest. But I think your mind is as deep as you want to explore it, sort of thing. And I think it's always good to have know where the fringe is and always be like, okay, I want to go beyond the fringe.
So it's basically Nietzsche would say that we're as a human being, we're walking over a tightrope over an abyss. We look down, we're fearful of the abyss, of the meaninglessness, right, of our lives. Nietzsche's encouraging us to, rather than look down on the abyss or even try and cross the abyss, just go over the abyss. Screw the abyss. Don't walk that tightrope, which is the morality between am I a good person, am I a bad person? Don't worry about that.
Don't get distracted by it.
Just go for it, right? And that is what gives you the strength to do good things. Ultimately, is not this fear of am I perverted, or is this a nasty thought? Is something? Am I doing something bad?
Yeah.
Just perform your actions, and then that will elevate you above that meaninglessness which we all encounter in our lives.
Yeah, I think even one thing Aubrey talked about this one time. Is like, if you were telling a story to someone about your life, would you be proud to tell it? Would you be proud to say that story was actually about you? And the things that you wouldn't be proud to tell someone, maybe those are things that you need to change in terms of the way you act or the way you think about things. And it's so true. It's like, on one side, it's you shouldn't be basing whether or not you have a good life on someone else's perceived judgment of that life. Yeah. But I think what you're perceiving of them of judging of you is really what you think. It's just you're almost like mirroring that on what you would think of someone else. So
it's hard to be honest with yourself. That's for sure.
Man, it is.
It's very hard.
It's like as soon as you think you're honest, you learn something else. You're like, I've been lying to myself a long time. Now I actually know that. What are the things what keeps you going and happy and gives you purpose now, right? Because I find it funny how people say, "Oh, what do you do for work?" and they think that that's what gives you purpose. It's like maybe I almost see people's work now as like an activity they do that they do for a reason. And that reason might literally be because that is a means that I use to achieve whatever monetary communication we use to be able to buy food to feed yourself, right? You no longer have to go hunt.
Work now ultimately has come down to an instrument. It's instrumental in our lives, right? As opposed to work, like, chopping wood and, hunting is an intrinsic work. It has a value in of itself. It's not used for anything else, right?
It's almost like it's a removed, it's like, just like hunting would get you food. Now you work to get money to get food. It's just like a segue. Yeah. But it doesn't define what you want to do, why you wake up every morning and don't just call quits. Like what, that's a very convoluted question, but like what gives you purpose? What if someone said, what gives you purpose in life? What would you say in like 5 sentences?
Like curiosity. I think
that's a good one.
This goes back to what philosophy is and how philosophy is a way of life. A philosopher, as Plato would describe it, is like a baby. He's curious. And like you look at a child, look at the world, everything's just so marvelous to him because he's experiencing it for the first time. Right. So the idea is to try to experience every day as a new experience and like to explore that curiosity and then use your faculties to strive towards it. To satisfying the curiosity, which I think ultimately will never be satisfied. I think once you don't have any curiosity, I think that's when you start dying.
And we take so many things for granted too, is because if you just notice little things, it's like, wow, that animal is acting that way that I saw, or even just like little things that you pick up, and the average person wouldn't even pay attention to them, or they would show no interest in them because they're concerned with all these, all the morality, like you're saying. But it's like, oh, cool. That exists. Like that's good to note. And if you're just curious about like how the world works over time, you can find interest in so many different areas, and it can kind of like spark that curiosity, and kind of that's that fire that gets you going every day.
Well, it's kind of like for Plato's cave, when he has an analogy of the cave, which kind of underlies like the philosophical life and like the way the philosopher should develop and emerge. And the way it's structured is that you start off in a cave, and then behind you is a fire. And then you're looking on the wall, and you see all these shadows on the wall. And then as you start developing and educating yourself, you realize that, wait, there may be something behind these shadows that's casting the shadow, right? So that is more real than the shadows themselves. So you turn around and you see the people casting the shadows walking around. It's a very, very rough way of putting his allegory. But then eventually you come out of the cave and you actually reach the sunlight, and you realize that everything in the cave was kind of an illusion. So philosophy starts off as kind of a disillusionment, is that, everything that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis may not be as it seems. And then from that understanding, that first principle, there's a curiosity to uncover what actually is casting those shadows. What is the substance that is giving, rise to the world and to ourselves? And that's kind of what propels the philosopher on his journey to self-discovery.
Wow. Like you just made a very complex premise very simple and understandable. I love it.
That's one of the values of philosophy. Yeah.
There you go. I didn't know you did your because what is it, a 4-year undergrad in philosophy?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't know you did that. That's now I understand how you're so knowledgeable on this stuff.
Well, it's just interesting because I remember I told my grandma from my dad's side. She's like, "Well, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to do for school for?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm going to philosophy." And her first response is, "Oh, there's no money in that." Okay. And I was like, "Yeah, you want to debate that? Because I'll have the skills to debate." The value in philosophy is not a career or anything like that. It's a certain mode and way of life that allows you to engage with ideas in certain fashions, right? So I can argue for something I inherently disagree with, but I can still purport it, argue it, right, and conclude with it
because you can see the other person's perspective.
I can see the perspective, right? And I can see how the arguments and premises come together and how they correspond, or how they
everyone should, before you even do your friggin' undergrad, everyone should be forced to do a year of philosophy.
I think philosophy should be one of the first things you're learning in school.
Yeah, because it literally is just it's sharpening your mind to give you the tools to be able to actually consume whatever knowledge you think at that time you want to look at. But it's almost like this baseline tool that if you're missing that tool, all the other shit you learn is never able to reach the potential of how well you can
have you can have the knowledge, but the ultimate form of like human faculty is the synthesis of taking all these things and synthesizing them together into worldviews or perspectives that are interesting and unique and novel, right? And
evaluating them. People just take shit at face value now. It's like, oh, I saw this thing on Facebook where it said this vitamin's bad for you, so clearly it's bad for you. It's like, well, you did
lazy thinking, right?
Lazy thinking.
There's
critical evaluation,
put into
no curiosity. I think that's a big thing. It's like people almost lack that curiosity to even. Not only do they not even have the tools to understand how to look into something, they don't even know it's possible to look into something further than just a blank statement that was told to you.
So I find it fascinating because part of my exercises in philosophy, I took some critical thinking courses and logic courses, stuff like that. You take a book like Descartes, for instance, you'd read Descartes, and then your exercise, your assignment would be boil his argument down to 150 characters.
Wow.
Right, so you have to take this complex argument that has multiple
Down to a Twitter sentence.
yeah, multiple facets, and you have to, and it has to be correct. Though. It has to be cohesive and logical,
Yeah.
and sound, and all these logical terms. But it's fascinating how you start boiling all the bullshit away,
Yeah.
and you get to the underlying kernel of the argument, and that's kind of what philosophy is the exercise in, right? Is you say all this stuff and you can boil it down to its essence and talk about the essence,
Yeah.
and get rid of all the chaff, right?
Wow.
And I find it interesting because then it helps you, like you say, you can be better at seeing somebody else's, like if you're interacting with somebody day to day, you have a better idea of like looking at like, oh, how have they got to this point where they're thinking about this thing this way.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool. You can break it down, and that helps you in the world, like you say.
Yeah.
It helps you with every single thing, every
Absolutely.
interaction that you have. That's there for you. Whereas if you learn something more specific in school, you don't have those fundamental.
So it's like if I
baselines.
encounter an idea that's contrary to my own, it's not like, oh, like I don't confront it or conflict it. It's like, oh, that's interesting. How'd you come to that? Explain that to me.
Yeah.
Right? I want to be able to understand it the way you understand
Yeah,
it.
And that's
because
curiosity.
Maybe I'll think that way too if I understand it the way you do.
Exactly.
But that's curiosity in and of itself.
Yeah.
It's like, how are you thinking?
Yeah.
Like, how are you thinking? How are you thinking? Like all these, and everyone's, how did you come to these conclusions? And a lot of people, it's just, that fascinates me too. I think that you saying that is just like, because people have all these thoughts, and it's like, I don't even think they know where they came to these thoughts, but that it's just like a never ending source of curiosity is to analyze how people are actually looking at the world,
Yeah.
and, you're like, and comparing it to how you look at the world. You're like, oh, cool. I see what you're doing there. I think about it this way, but at least I see what you're doing there.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe, like, would you agree that, of this too? And I think when people are both open to that, when you have good thinkers who get together, I think that's really key, because you can kind of change your views of the world based on other people's views, and maybe make it fit your model a little bit better too.
Yeah.
But like the key there is like open-mindedness and like a quest for
A willingness to engage.
a willingness to engage. Exactly.
Because if you just say, oh, that guy, like for instance, if I identify as an atheist, that guy's a theist, oh, he's irrational, and you start attributing all these things to him, it's like, no. Like there's value in theology, there's value in religion. Let's pinpoint why he's like this.
Exactly. Like you said, distill out what is the first point of separation, right? Like we're seeing each other 100 kilometers apart. But if we both start at the same point, what was the first point where we veered along different paths? And what is the premise that led us? Why did we choose that path?
Yeah.
Because I think that's part of, this is a big underlying lack of philosophical understanding of just critical thinking or trying to see the other person's perspective. This is a big reason why people suck in debates and having conversations, and why we start to get so tribal. It's like we're not even trying to find agreement. We're not even being curious of why they've created that perspective. We're just like, you're A, I'm B, I'm on B side. I got to defend B side to the death. Even if I care a lot, even if your A side might have a lot of value for me to understand it. Maybe I don't agree with it, but I should damn well try and at least understand it so I can make a good judgment and just respect you as a human with an opinion that might be different than mine.
Yeah.
I think that's getting worse too.
Particularly in religion and politics, it's awful in those two categories.
And I think one of the big reasons is now we have an outlet like via the internet to like find the people who think the same as you, and then like you say, like tribe together. So it's like now we're not just us against it. It's like if you just met a person on the street and you started having a conversation, I'm sure it would be a lot different than if you're debating that same person's group with your group via social media.
Well, group psychology is much different than individual psychology.
Exactly.
Right? You try and be reasonable with a group, it's probably not going to work. Try and be reasonable with an individual of that group, you can probably have a decent discussion, right? The group psychology is much different than individual psychology. And today, because of our environment and the sheer number of people and the way we organize the people in our society through technological means like cell phones and all that stuff, it just we don't get those individual discussions anymore. There's contact between individuals. There's always contact between groups, and that's where
Very
you get
true.
the tyranny and the mobs and all that stuff, right?
Yeah. Probably a good place to maybe finish off is, what level of involvement with technology have you found to be a good one at this point in time? Like, if we weren't, I really think that if we weren't involved with social media as a means to spreading whatever message we're trying to spread or engage in commerce with people, like people only find out about seminars and get in touch through Instagram, right? So it's not an option to not use it. But I think if that wasn't the case, I don't know if I'd be using it. I think I would, like, I don't use Facebook. I think there's a happy medium where you can consume some technology, but when you go past the threshold, it actually starts to become very negative for you. And like one thing you feel it with is like, okay, if you don't bring your phone for a day or you go on a hike, I feel way better. Whether I want to admit that or not, I feel way better. I feel more tuned to having more direction in life and having like just a better sense of happiness. So how much technology do you use, and have you
what's your framework too for how you use it? What
Yeah.
framework do you have?
I use it mainly just to keep in contact with people. I do go on the YouTube binges and stuff like that occasionally.
Yes.
Everyone does, but more so for me, it's I have this weird perspective on technology where it's like a necessary evil. It's like you can't really function without it.
Exactly.
And if you choose to completely denounce it, it's like you put yourself at a disservice.
Yeah.
So for me, it's mainly to keep in mind that online, particularly the online world, is that it's very much a spectacle. It's not reality. And then this guy Dubard writes a book about it, and it's called The Society of the Spectacle, in which we now live in a culture in which the image precedes the reality. So Matrix kind of deals with this topic, and it's like what comes first, the territory or the map? So back in the day, traditionally, you'd have guys explore territory, and from that territory, they'd create a map. Now it's kind of being inverted, in which the map comes before the territory. So people have this image of what something should be, and then they shape the world to fit that sort of image. It's kind of a reverse relationship in which we have a spectacle, which is what you see on Facebook, with all these ads about things that correspond to your personality and stuff like that, and you start imposing that on the world and thinking that is the actual reality of the world, but actually the reality is the streams and the forests and all
That's
that.
a very good way
and
of
all that
putting
stuff, right? So we live in a very anthropocentric world in which there's a natural world and the human world. They don't necessarily have to clash, but I think now and today, because of technology, at an ever rapid rate, they're becoming more and more dissociated, in which the spectacle is taking on reality for the human being as opposed to the actual reality. So we live in a world of images. So I think technology is not necessarily inherently bad, but if it gets to the point in which you can no longer kind of appreciate the reality of things, and you're living in the world of...
If it gets blurry.
If you're living in the world of the spectacle and of the image, I think that's when it starts doing a disservice to human beings.
And I think it's hard to be mentally healthy living in the world of the spectacle. It's like you almost always need this constant anchor to bringing you to what reality is, right? If you peel all the layers off, go into nature for a day, or push yourself physically.
Use your physical body. That's that anchor, right?
That's your anchor, because it doesn't lie. And
Which
it's
goes back
always there.
Which goes for a circle back to the bare feet. Literally touch the earth. Like don't. It's really grounded. Like it's.
You're right.
That's part of the spectrum for me. Is I'm literally touching, like my toes are like roots.
Yeah,
right?
the earth.
I'm growing. I'm part of that earth.
And
And it feels good. It feels good
great,
to do it, right?
It almost has its own meaning.
It feels like you belong.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to having this disconnect between your environment. I belong in the environment. That's basically what it comes down to.
Very cool. Well, thanks for doing this, Danny. We appreciate it.
Not a problem.
Like it's almost like, I think without these mics here, the goal is to have conversations that you would have if the mics weren't here.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like if we went out to dinner, we probably would have said exactly what we just
Pretty
said.
much,
and I think that's almost hard to do, right? Because this big black thing, or this big piece of technology staring at you in the face, so it's hard to not acknowledge it. But I think let's do this again in a year, and
Absolutely.
I think it might go down a different path. And I think I think it would be a lot of fun, and it was a good conversation. So we appreciate it.
I look
man.
forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Anyway,
Awesome.
hope you guys enjoyed that conversation, and it shed a little bit of light on maybe some things that you find interesting or are curious about. So we'll catch you guys later.